Okay, just a quick video here to go through some of the many settings that we have in a label connector for QuickBooks to make it function at a more advanced level. By default, we're printing either the quantity of one or the quantity that's on the order for various types of orders, or you can use the item list print mode, shown in the previous video. But let's just go through the settings. Assuming you've got a template designed and you've got it functioning and printing, there's various advanced things that we can do to add more logic, specialized logic that you may want to perform to kind of extend the capability of Label Connector. So there's some things in general settings we'll cover first of all, and briefly touched on earlier. You can either use our designer or the bartender designer. You're required to purchase a license of bartender to use that designer. That is functional and will work. Our designer comes incorporated into the package, for our regular price, so there's no added licenses that you need to purchase with that. Here you can set the default behavior of the type of order that you want to search on, and then here you can select the printer like in the screen you're using, using that setting. Let's just stick with that for now. Or you can select a common printer that's just going to be used throughout, so you never have to select the printer over again, which is useful if you just have the one printer you want to use. So let's just save that and exit. I'm just going to mostly talk through the settings here. You can always inquire with AccuWare about helping to get set up with each of these types of settings. But so within an order type, we have settings like, for example, I'll get into what packaging mode is in a separate video, but let's say you're wanting to use invoices to print labels for outbound orders. The most common setting that people will work with is they'll either use the invoice quantity as the quantity to print for each item, or they'll just default to print quantity 1 label for each line item on that invoice, and we can put the quantity of the invoice onto the label. So this is useful for smaller items, and this is more useful for larger items. The example here would be if you want to just print one label because maybe the order showed a quantity of 40, and maybe you want 40 to print onto the label to put on a bag or a box for smaller items. So in that case you would set that to that setting for quantity 1. Also, inside invoice settings, we have an advanced feature here where you can divide by a value. So let's say you don't want to print the invoice quantity as the quantity of labels to print. Maybe you pack 10 of those per box and you only want 4 labels to print, and you want us to handle that automatically. We can do that if you create a custom item field in your items to contain the value for the quantity per container. So like in a case of beer, that would be you'd say quantity per case in as a custom item field, and then in that custom item field for that item you would populate 24, so that we would know to divide by 24 if you want to put one label on each case. Again, we can go into that in more detail with you on a case-by-case basis, but that will divide by that quantity automatically for you. So that's very handy for people that want to do less than the order quantity as the quantity to print and divide down. So we get into, now you're going to see a general theme that a lot of those same settings are in the other modes as well. In sales orders, we can again default to print the sales order quantity by default, or just print 1 as we covered for invoices. We can divide by a quantity per container as well, but a more advanced function that we can also do in sales orders is we can use a markup value to actually take the value that's in the sales order and mark it up by, let's say, 25% or 10% or something like that. And that gets done by creating a custom field inside your customer in QuickBooks. And let's say you can name it anything you want, but you just have to enter that custom item field name here, and if that multiplier, it needs to be 1.1, then if you populate that in the customer into that custom item field as 1.1 for that value, then we'll take all the sell prices and multiply them all by 1.1, and we can print that on the label. We can also print the regular price along with the markup price, and you can use that for discounting as well for sales. So we can multiply by 0.8. So you can, what this does, this is very powerful, you can actually put a different custom item field value for different customers. So if some are going to get different prices on their labels than others, this is useful for like wholesalers that would like to have, you know, a price that they label things with, give those products to their retailer who may want, you know, to the retail price to be on those labels, so the price that you're actually selling to that retailer at isn't what you want on the label, because that retailer would like retail price on that label. So that's useful for those types of applications, and again, you can ask us any of those things if you call into AccuWare. And then lastly, we'll go through some things. Well, we got to go through a couple more. Purchase order settings. We do have a capability to read item receipts, but that works right now with the bartender designer only. That's more of an advanced feature. Most people are just wanting to read the regular purchase orders. And again, this mode is useful for labeling incoming goods into your company. So if you want to, like, as things come in from a vendor, you might want to like use purchase orders to label things that are coming in, whereas sales orders and invoices are useful for items that are going out to customers and need to be labeled on the way out. Here again, we have that same feature for changing the default quantity to print either to be 1 or the order quantity. Here we have an even more advanced capability to use up to 3 different values that are selectable in a drop-down. When a value is populated into each of these 3 or 2 of the 3, then we present a drop-down right here of you can have up to 3 different custom item field values and entries that we can use to divide by, because sometimes people want to print a quantity per case or a quantity per pallet. So there might be the quantity per case value might be 24, but the quantity per pallet might be, you know, 10 times that 24. So we can divide down for doing pallet labeling. So some pretty advanced math that we can do, and again, we can help you implement that feature under purchase order label printing. And then lastly, under the item list screen, our item list is printing has the capability to use a whole grid, as I showed in the previous value, or one item at a time. Again, we can print one label by default when that grid comes up, or we can print the quantity on hand, or you can edit that just before you print that. So we also have the ability to like have an entry field right in the line, so you can change the way that appears on the grid, and I can show you that grid in a little bit, but you can actually have a grid value that comes up with the items where you can have an entry point to put onto the label, so that you can have like a last minute entry in the item list grid to get onto the label. And then we've done things with some advanced things with FTPing up the item list to your website if that's something that's of interest to you. But when we use the item list printing mode, we synchronize the items because we make a local copy of the needed data for your items list. So we take a snapshot, and you can always redo that snapshot because some people have really long extensive item lists, and so it's useful for us to be able to just make that data local. All other modes in Label Connector read the data live. This particular mode reads a snapshot of the data. So if your item list is short, it's really quick to synchronize. If your item list is really long, the responsiveness of the database just can't do it with longer huge item lists, so we synchronize and we make a synchronized copy of the item list right here. So so anyway, that's kind of an overview of the different settings. If you are going to use item list printing, again, that's just one of our modes. Here's the grid that appears, so we can use this grid to print, and then if you can have an entry field, and you can change how that title looks. So you could make that entry be anything you want for printing onto the label. So and then you can use single item print mode, which is useful with a scanner. So if you're just going to print one label at a time, the same template works for multi or single item list printing, but we can let you scan into this. We pull up the description. You can enter a value here if you like to appear on the label. You can specify quantities and things like that just before you print. So so that's an overview of the different settings. Hopefully, if you've got Label Connector installed, this will help you kind of navigate trying to get some of the features enabled to work properly with your installation. Thanks.